we're here with Lena Neal as well. Hi, Lena. Lena's with the ISODC, and we have also a few other people here that we'll introduce in a minute. Lena, why don't you say hi and a little welcome from ISODC.
Terrific. Thanks, Steve. Yes, this is Lena Neal, and welcome from the International Society for Organization Development and Change. We are really pleased to be working with Nexus for Change on this exciting webinar. For those of you who were with us last week for the webinar with Marv Weisborg, Owen Harrison, no, I got it wrong, Harrison Owen, and Peter Sorensen, welcome back for our second version. And we also wanted to make sure you knew that the ISODC is having an exciting conference coming up May 19 to the 22nd at George Williams Conference Center on the shores of Lake Geneva in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And for more information, you can check it out on our website at isodc.org. And please plan on coming and joining us. It's going to be an excellent time, and we welcome Steve, Katie, and John Spalding will be with us, as well as Therese Yeager, one of our panelists, and Peter Sorensen, where we'll be celebrating 50 years of organization development education. So thank you.
Yep, that's awesome, and thank you, Lena. And one of the passions of Nexus for Change, the mission, is to be a community of communities gathering place, a place that brings great work like ISODC and Benedictine and ODN, as well as all the other organizations and people and groups and communities around methodologies like real-time strategic change with Jake, or the Future Search Network, or Appreciative Inquiry. All the organizations and their communities that are doing great work. Nexus aims to be the space for gathering, the space for sharing, the space for connecting all these communities of practice in a very supportive and helpful and encouraging way. We're all doing great work in the world, and a lot of times it's very lonely out there, and you all are doing great work in the world. And this is a place for us to share so we can do better work and be encouraged to do even more work and keep on the good work that we do. So with that, we have a cool group of people here. Peter, I think you're cool. Peter who? Peter Sorensen. But Peter was our star for last week. The star for this week is Teresa, and Peter's backing her up. He's like, you're her backup singer today. And we've got Teresa Yeager, and many of you know her. We've got Jake Jacobs, we've got Lena Neal, we've got John Spalding. John, we need your picture up there at some point here. We've got myself, and we have Diana Whitney. Diana can't be here, so I'm just going to ask that we take about 10 seconds to a moment of silence to think about her mom who had a stroke, her mom who is down in Florida, and Diana with her, and whoever's making the loud noise in the background, whatever that noise is, you might want to mute yourself. But if we could take 10 seconds, everybody, and from whatever faith and whatever belief background we have, if we could send some energy, prayers, and thoughts down there to Diana and her mom, I'd appreciate that. So let's take 10 minutes of silence, and for those of you that are making background noise, you can mute yourself and our panelists. Great. And so my thoughts are with Diana and her mom, and that they have all the healing and support that they can have to help them through this time. And I just sent a big hug out to Diana right now. She's a wonderful person, and we wish she could be here with us today. So with that, let's look at the topic today. And so what I'd like to do is just have each of our panelists introduce themselves briefly. And what is the question? What is the thing? The interest you have in this topic of on the shoulders of giants. And so let's start with Teresa. Could you speak a little bit to the purpose for today from your perspective?
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for having me part of this hour. Standing on the shoulders of giants was a theme that intrigued me, And then alongside that is Lena Neal for the ISODC conference talking about women in OD. So what do you do when you have two different ideas? You meld them. And I think On the Shoulders of Giants gives us a little bit of history where we were last week and all the things that unsurfaced and we got to discuss. And then this week, I'd like to talk a little bit about women and who those giant shoulders we could stand on might be.
And Jake, how about you?
Well, Steve, you and I know that we stand directly on the shoulders of a giant, Kathy Dannemiller. We both had the opportunity to have her directly mentor us, and Ron Lippitt, I also had the great privilege and opportunity to know and have direct conversations, be influenced by him. And so for me, all of this work goes back to Kurt Levine and all of these folks, including Billy and Barbara, Billy Alvin, Barbara Bunker. There are so many people in our field that have made such great contributions. And for me, the taproots, they all come home. So regardless of what work we do and how different it may look on the surface, if we go back in time, we find the same father. And religions do this with Abraham. Well, we do it with the folks in our field.
Great. Lena, how about you?
For myself, I realize that there are so many, especially great women who have really been the giants in the field and often are not recognized. And so I really want to indicate my support for those women who have gone on and really have made this all very possible.
Great, thank you. John, you want to add anything? What's happening out in Chatland? What's bringing people? What are you seeing? And what would you like to add to this?
Sure. I'm excited to be here, and I definitely resonated with the title, and I'm looking forward to talking about the future trends that Teresa's going to share and that we're going to reflect on. There's a couple requests in Chatland for you, Steve, to make the slides in slideshow view. There are a couple questions wondering if it was the Jake Jacobs that was in the session. So you have some fans out there, Jake. There's some other interesting people checking in from where they were, from Bowling Green. Diane was a coach to answer the question, and she graduated from BG in 1976. She's an American Studies major. Melissa was stating that she's looking forward to the ISODC conference in Wisconsin. There are some other discussions that are kind of rolling in and trickling in, but it looks like people are excited and engaged and glad to be here.
Great, thanks, John. And for everybody out there in Chatland, I'm experimenting with some what I would call real-time graphic facilitation. And I'm trying to figure out, you may have a technology, but what I'm actually doing is I have one computer up and one screen, which I will be dropping in graphics and things that capture our stories. And it'll be showing up here on the screen that you're seeing, and I'm trying to figure out how to have that, because I put it in presentation mode. Anything I add to the presentation will not show up when it's in presentation mode. Somebody may have a solution out there that they would recommend that would allow me to do that, and I welcome it, but I'm using two computers to do it, so I'm experimenting a little bit today to find a way. So I just made the view a little bit bigger, just makes it a little bit harder. So when we think of standing on giants, and we can go ahead and jump in. I went back to where did this notion of standing on the shoulders of giants come from? And what's interesting is we have Isaac Newton, who said what Descartes did was a good step. You have added much several ways, and especially taking the colors of thin plates into philosophical consideration. If I have seen a little further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And so one perspective that he brings is they help us see a little bit further in what is possible that maybe we didn't see was possible without them. That quote really kind of was founded with the John of Salisbury when he wrote here that we are like dwarfs sitting on the shoulders of giants. We see more, and things that are more distant than they did, not because our sight is superior or because we are taller than they, but because they raise us up and by their great stature, add to ours. And so what I'd love to do is jump in and start with one of you, and I think I'll just start with, I'll start with Jake, I'll start with you. What is your story that you would like to share? Do you have a story that you would like to share that's a favorite story of a giant that you'd love to share, and reflect on that quote in terms of how did it help you see further? How did this person help you see further?
Sure, Steve. So to speak to the women in OD, my story is a Ron Lippitt story. And I want to note that in the 70s, he started the earliest large group work with Eva Schindler-Rainman, and they partnered around communities. The story that Ron had told was that he was at one of those boys' camps in the summer doing research, and Fritz Radel was there as well. And Fritz was holding some child, and the child was just screaming and carrying on. And Ron, as a social scientist making a joke to another social scientist, said to him, Fritz, having a little trouble with your client, are you? And Fritz looked back and said to Ron, well, actually, Ron, until this child has an ego, I have no client. So for me, it's both a funny story, but also speaks to having a collective ego in a client system. So if I'm working with a leadership team, working with a whole organization, working with a large group, until there is that sort of collective identity, collective ego, that level of connection, I can't really do good work with them. And so I go back to that story of Ron and Fritz and that notion of what's my work in terms of helping to build that collective ego, that level of teamwork and discourse and sort of collaboration, so that people can move forward together. And that was a story that Ron told, and I was fortunate enough to get invited to different things that Ron was doing because of that woman with the big smile on her face, Kathy Dannemiller.
Great, thank you. Therese, how about you?
As far as giants, I don't want to call out one particular person, but I do want to call out one particular instance where I fell in love with OD by standing on giant's shoulders, and I was only reading. So if that sounds simple, it is just that simple. I fell in love with something called the OD Addison Wesley series. And there was a 6-pack of books, and they were little and skinny and $12 or $15. And when I was working in organizations, and you're thinking about working 8 or 10 hours a day, and the weekend was only to get fueled up for the next week that was in front of us, you started to ask the big question, what's so meaningful about this? And if we do so much work, do we like what we do, and is it meaningful? And somewhere along the way, you meet up with org behavior, and you learn more about org development, and you just get a hold of that 6-pack, and you read and read and read. And for that reason, so much of what I know about OD comes from that early 6-pack of OD, and I'm going to call out that Addison Wesley book series, where it was Warren Bennis writing about organization development, its nature, origins, and prospects. I loved building a dynamic corporation with managerial grid with Robert Blake and Jane Luton. The Lawrence and Lorsch, developing organization diagnosis and action. We all know that there was an Edgar Schein who helped start that whole series with his book Process Consultation. And finally, Richard Walton on interpersonal peacemaking. So of course, conflict management is what we call it. And you understand that there were people dealing with those kind of issues in the 70s, 80s that we encountered every day in the workforce. And I thought, I want to do more of what they do. So I don't stand on their shoulders. I just immersed myself in reading. And along the way, you meet French and Bell, and you literally meet the Frenches and the Bells out there, and you understand how cool what they write in their textbook is now in its 6th edition. And then you meet Cummings and Worley, but before there was a Worley, there was a Hughes and Cummings, and all that starts to make sense. So if I do anything, I stand on their shoulders because they actually published and wrote things that fascinated me about what happens to the worker in the organization and what happens in our human nature when things have to change. And I saw a lot of change in the 70s and 80s. And by the way, when all that hit me, I was still in my 20s. And I thought, where is the meaningful of what I'm doing 5, 6 days a week? So with that said, I'm not standing on their shoulders. I'm just immersed in their thinking. Does that help at all? Can I keep going, or do you want to go to somebody else?
If you have any more you want to share, please share. Otherwise, we'll go to somebody else.
So I'll just continue very quickly that also along the way, there is a wonderful article, or a very lightweight article, but it was helpful for me. In 1985, there was a training and development journal, and everybody on the line, you could probably find it online, no problem. And the title of it was OD's Top 10, who they are and how they got there. Now, I have it because I use it in my grad classes when we talk about research and research and organization development. So in 1985, Training and Development Journal published an article by the great Glenn Varney and Janet Hillman. And this list of top 10 is actually spelled out. And I could say the list quickly because you'll all know their names. But the first one is Dick Beckhart. The second one is Michael Beer. The third one is Bennis. The fourth is Warner Burke. Then there's Ed Lawler, Tony Petrella, Ed Schein, Bob Tannenbaum, and then finally our great Peter Vail that we talked about last week, and on the call was Marvin Weisbord. So that wraps up the 10. But the big takeaway from there, and because we're going to talk, I hope we get to talk a little bit about women in OD, or the need for women in OD. They were all men, they were all white men, they were all Caucasian. And I've loved that article ever since, because I thought this is where, and there's no problem with that. That's where we were in the 80s. And I'd like to think that today, even by doing any polls, you'll find out that more than half of the people in OD tend to be females. So I think I'll just leave it at there as far as things that intrigue me about OD. And if I could just stand on the shoulder of Glenn Varney and Janet Hillman and say they started something very interesting about who are those giants in OD. They didn't call them giants, they said OD's top 10. But if this conversation is around giants, I think that helps contribute to what we're talking about today. So thanks, Steve, for letting me finish that.
Cool. Thank you. Lena, what are your thoughts?
Well, Steve, you know, if I think back, for me, there were a couple of key ideas. I really got my start. A lot of it was around training and development, and I remember going, my gosh, why I get all these great reviews for my training and everything is terrific, but the change that we were helping people to learn about wasn't happening. And so that opened up all kinds of questions for me back in the 70s. You know, why isn't this terrific training bringing about the change that we need? And that kind of led me into the field of organization development and change. And in particular, I want to give a shout out to a couple of folks, one of whom, or several of whom have gone on. One was Libby Duvan. For those who may not know Libby, she was in Ann Arbor, but she was affiliated with the Fielding Institute. And I had the great honor of studying with her back in the early 1990s. And for me, she was one of the giants in the field, not only because of her wonderful social science insights, but her wonderful friendship and being a great mentor. She then introduced me to some other wonderful people that I want to give a shout out to. One is Charlie Seashore. Charlie, who passed on last year, was also an inspiration to me, and I'll never forget one of the key things that Charlie taught me, and that was to remain grounded. And in some cases that meant take my shoes off and literally put my feet on the ground in order to be grounded. I'm also thinking back on people that had great influence. Will Winnie, who is also affiliated with Fielding, and much of his work in systems thinking, which ties me back to Peter Senge. And in terms of influencers, I also want to give a shout out to Barbara Mink, who was she's still active in the field and was also another influence for me. So just wanted to share those. coming out of the training and development area and asking those questions. Why isn't the training working? Why isn't it bringing about our desired results? Led me into a wonderful field called organization development and change.
Thank you. John, what's happening out there in Chatland? What are your thoughts on what you're hearing?
I came to OD later, and so one of my earlier influences were my instructors at Alvin Green. Steve, you were one of them. But also my work with Kathy Dannemiller after that was very inspiring and motivating for me. The picture of the no ego on the first slide that you've been graphically facilitating is really stood out to me in my work with her and how she helped me to understand the difference and understand the place where I was coming from. Everybody that has been mentioned has been someone that I have researched, read, and studied. I particularly looked into Ron Lippitt and a lot of his work, and I still refer to some of his articles this day in terms of some of the work that I do. In terms of Chatland, everyone's doing well. Ron Kohler said that Lena is, or that Therese is driving up the prices on Amazon.com by mentioning all of those OD book series. There are some other people who have joined. Sherry said that she'd like to give Kathy, Ron, and Nancy Bedore and Peter Block and the people at Ford a shout out, as they were giants for her and starting out of her field in OD. And Julie thought that that was a nice collage of photos. So that's my check-in.
So, Therese, what are you hearing that connects your stories?
Thanks, Steve. So part of this is there's no question that in the 80s, I think Glenn Barney's article was spot on. I think that everybody that he cited in that. Oh, thanks for putting that title up there on the screen, by the way. OD's Top 10, Who They Are. That helped so much. In there, list that top 10, and I think in the 1980s I had no problem with it. But if you present that in a research class today or to a group of OD people today, we're smart enough and open enough to say, where are the women and how is it that women can be on there? So if I go back to that, I'll link that to the six-pack, OD Addison Wesley OD six-pack. And same story is that six-pack with those people, you know, the Shines and the Burks and the Bennises, the Blakes, it was again lacking women, but there was the Jane Mouton with Robert Blake. And I can rarely think of an article, maybe Peter could, of a Robert Blake article without his colleague, Jane Mouton. And I think that was a big aha for me. And then as the six-pack of OD grew well beyond six into the 20s and, 3 dozen, I think, is where it stopped, we started to see names in that OD Addison Wesley series with perhaps Jean Bartunek, perhaps Virginia Shine, Peter wrote with Larry Greiner. So we started to see women come in as colleagues or co-authors. But we still lack women who, although it's out there, we still lack people who are writing books. Sadly, without Kathy Dannemiller, who wrote her great book, we need more women publishing. And I think that that's the key there is that the people back in, or the men back in the 1985 Training and Development article were all, one key to their success was publications and getting books and getting articles. And I think we need to see more of that with the women, Steve.
Lena, how about you? What themes are you seeing in your conversation? Who's you? Lena?
Yes, here I am. I was on mute. I think Sandra's eager to move on to trends. She wants to know about the trends, and I think maybe that's really where we want to move on to. What do you think, Steve?
I think so, but I still, what I'm not hearing that I really want to get at, if I could, from you, what are the characteristics of these giants? What was it that made them as impactful on you as they were?
Oh, well, for me, it's clearly helping to answer questions such as, why wouldn't our initiatives, why aren't they working? What else am I overlooking in order to work with organizations with groups and bringing new insights into those questions. For me, that was so critical.
Yeah, and for me, you know, I think what I have, and I continue to be struck by with these giants is the gift. They tend to operate their life, and they tend to work from a place of sharing, a place of offering, a place of inviting. Kathy Dannemiller, for example, and we talked about her a bit, but I think you can speak to others. People would show up from all over the world at her doorstep, and she would invite them in, and they'd stay for a day, a week. And a common saying among many, I think, is, I want to share. This works. What I'm doing, I think, makes a difference. And I'm not so concerned about getting credit as much as I am in seeing and helping others and sharing this in more of a place from gift, a place of sharing it freely. And that's something that I see that connects a lot of these giants. Therese, is there anything else that you would add that's a characteristic of these giants and what made them so?
I love your, thanks. I love your concept of gifts and sharing, and I like Lena's about the insight. But I also think that there was a level of experience where I looked to those people because they'd seen challenges and they were humble enough to say that what didn't work. And I think just that experience and that humility about challenges was so I was so appreciative of that.
So that's great.
Think about a current book. Ed Schein was at Benedictine last week, and one of the books he wrote was DEC, D-E-C is dead, long live DEC. In other words, I was a consultant for a very long time in an organization that closed. And I think that takes a level of humility to say, look, I was part of a failure. And it wasn't a failure in all respects. The tremendous learning about the world of technology and organizations. But do you see that the difference between that and a person who would never admit learning and challenges?
Right. Yep. I definitely do. And I'll say even the notion of failure versus learning. That's always open to learning. Always open to learning. So, well, thank you. Does anybody want to add anything else? Jake, Lena, John, Peter, I know you're a backup singer for Therese today. Is there anything you want to add before we move on?
No, I'm just having fun listening, but thank you.
Okay, cool.
Steve,
Anybody
one thing that I would toss in, I mean, from Bruce Gibb and Al Davenport, Kathy, and her late partner Chuck Tyson, I got as a gift for my birthday 20 of the Addison Wesley series, and I'm looking at them right now. And so I agree that there's Therese, I think it was you speaking to them, just a lot of captured wisdom. And Steve, in terms of like what made it work, or why giants, I think both the learning and also, I think it was like they were forging new ground. And so a lot of people were trying to figure things out. And there was a level of curiosity, and then I think there was also a level of connection. I know not all of the people that we've described were directly connected with NTL, but when I went up there in the summer, it was a gathering place physically for a number of those folks. And I know that others, like the Lake and Mouton, I mean, they wrote things together. So there was a community of these folks that I think were connected to each other, and both spurred each other out of their curiosity, but also supported each other.
Right on. Thank you. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is that they brought a gift, created an invitation. They didn't know everything, and they brought this expertise in a unique way to people. And they also had this enjoyment of being together, like at NTL and other places, and sharing and pushing their thinking further. And so those are some of the things that connected them, is what I'm hearing you say. And so as we think about where we are today, and I think I'd like to focus on today before we talk about the future. Where are we today, Therese?
Oh, I was happy to do the past, and I'm happy to do the future. And you stumped me on today because I think today OD is growing. I think OD has just in the short less than 2 decades I've been a part of it. I think that OD has flourished, and this could be measured if you get the how question. And I think it's been measured as far as master's programs, doctoral programs. We've seen all those flourish. I'm surprised to say that I know schools that have OD courses for undergraduates and OD course, maybe OD majors. So I know that there is a yearning for OD knowledge out there. And I think that speaks a lot to the world that we live in right now, where it's not as stable as it was 30 or just 20 or just 10 years ago. The velocity of change calls for more OD knowledge. So I think where is OD in the present? I think it's doing great. I'd like to talk more about the future and all the exponential or all the potential work that's ahead of us.
Great, thank you. Jake, how about you?
I mean, for me, I think there is some level of disconnection that wasn't there when we've talked about some of these other folks. And I think some of that's sort of a natural byproduct of what you're describing in terms of this proliferation of programs. I know when I went to Pepperdine for an MSOD, there was sort of a choice between American University's program, Pepperdine's, Case Western had a program, but there weren't dozens that you could choose from. And I think it's sort of a natural transition period where there's this convergence and divergence. And my experience is we're in a big period of divergence, whereas in the beginning people were out trying to figure it out, and you could capture what people were learning in something like an Addison Wesley series. Now you can go on the web and people's blogs and different things that are happening. There's so much happening that that I feel like we're not as connected. We don't even know what some of the good work is that's being done in the world. And so when we look to the future, I've got some ideas about that. The one other piece that occurs to me about the past, I feel like it would not be worthy without telling this, which was a Bob Tannenbaum story. And I think I was like 23 and sort of, was quite convinced that I, along with what I'd learned from these folks, had a right answer. And I said to him in a lab, I said, how do you know when you're so certain about something, maybe I'm not right, maybe I've got the wrong answer. And he looked back and he said something I remember to this day, which is, the more certain it is that I have the answer, the clearer it has become to me I need to revisit the question.
Great, thank you. John, anything you want to add before we move to the future?
Not
What's
really.
happening out there in chat?
Other than what's currently out in the chat room, which has really taken off since that discussion. So I don't think so. I'm just going to bring a couple things in here. It says, Joe says, is OD a career path, or is it part of other career paths? Roberta said OD is merging with organizational leadership. Julie says currently the challenges from change management and ACMP certification. Another present is that there's something of a gap between scholars and practitioners. Roberta said, where are the thriving OD communities like NTL? Michael says the market and need for OD is growing, but the ability to satisfy that demand is weakening. And so I think we can move, with that we can move to trends, and then I'll bring some more of the stuff in that's coming out in the chat room.
Great, thank you.
Steve, it's Lena. I just wanted to add one thing to the conversation, and it goes back to a book that I remember so well back in the early 1970s, and that was Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. And and that to me certainly speaks to what we are experiencing today and what I believe we will continue to experience going forward. I think Alvin Toffler's insights were really quite important to what we're experiencing.
Thank you. And Is there one thing that you would, what was his main premise or something that he offered or suggested that you felt was important that still lasts till today?
Sure, a couple of things. One is the proliferation of information, that we're diluted, you know, we've become overwhelmed with information, or data, I should call it data, and then trying to figure out what is that data about, what information is really there. If you will, making a distinction between all the data and what is real information. The other piece, of course, was the technology impact and the need for the changing work skills in the workforce.
You see that image there? On the proliferation of information?
Ah, very nice.
1999, 4 years, every 2 years, and then every 10 minutes.
Yep. The
We're
rapidity.
doing a lot of stuff. Okay, well let's move to the future. Therese, there's 4 trends, and I'm curious as to what else might be out there in Chatland. So as you all are listening, what are some other trends, as Therese speaks to, that you might think would add to the list or modify in the list? So Therese, share with us these trends and how how did you come to create these trends or identify these and what they mean and a little bit about them.
Thanks, and cut me off because I'm sensitive to time for everybody. This is at Benedictine, and this is Peter and Therese and the Benedictine students and colleagues and faculty that we've seen 4 trends surface just in our less than 50, almost 50 years, Peter, or over 50 years at Benedictine. And one of them is the concept of a more strategic OD. And there's no question that I think the need for micro conflict or better team building within a small team is very important. I think OD's bigger contribution would be more at a macro level. So macro OD, where we're talking about a whole system, where we're talking about an entire organization, much more at the strategic level, where even the OD person and the OD team are reporting closer to the executives in the organization. So that's one I think that we have to look for more, because more and more I run into OD people and they say, yeah, I'm an OD person. I help individuals with their understand their Myers-Briggs scores, or I hear micro OD, which I won't ding at all. We need that, but we do need to see OD at a more strategic macro level. And I think Peter and I have done a special issue for the OD Journal on strategic OD. So that's one of them. Another one, of course, is the obvious, which is global organization development, because what we do in the USA that we call OD might be called something else in another part of the world, and yet they're intrigued by our OD and they may call it something about HR something or team building efforts. So they don't necessarily give it the formal term organization development. But we also, as students of Benedictine, the students have to get out of the USA and see what OD looks like in another part of the world before those students graduate. So I think there's a lot of need to understand global OD, as big as that is, and in any way you unpackage, we need to look at that more. And then, of course, with Diana not on the line, I'd love to talk about the whole element of positive organization development. With Diana, this is where she could talk about appreciative inquiry. And along with that is, again, through master's programs and university programs, there's even Case Western now, they have a POD, a positive org development degree. And you start to understand the need for doing more than just critiquing and fixing organizations, but to look at the positive aspects of the organization. Peter, I think our last one was more about opportunities for OD beyond corporate, and think about where Kurt Levine started, over 50, 60, 70 years ago, talking about OD's contribution in the larger public sector with social service agencies. And we're getting more research out just this year on the need for more OD work in the public sectors in the social system. So those are just 4 ideas for us. Peter, you want to add to it?
No, I think you did a nice job.
I think we could go on and on and on, but those are our 4 top ones.
Okay. So let's look to the future, and Jake, if you could reflect, and I think you also mentioned the scholar practitioner model for the future. You also mentioned something about that as well. Did you want to speak to the scholar practitioner model? And I think which is a strength of your program, at Benedictine.
Peter? Peter's turn. I'm all talked out. Peter? when people are come into a doctoral program, we have to make it very clear we are not creating academics for T1 or Tier 1 Research 1 institutions. I think OD is a practice, and we take good practitioners, excellent practitioners, and they go through a PhD program, and along the way they become scholarly practitioners. So it's exactly what you said, Steve. There is much work and there's much contribution from the world of scholar practitioners.
Steve, let me just make an additional comment in terms of we're heavily invested in socializing our students into not only the practitioner but the academic community. And I think that we've done a fairly decent job of having our students present at the Academy and publish. And we're certainly looking forward to more contributions coming out of the Benedictine program.
Thank you. Jake, what are your thoughts on the future? What do you see? How would you elaborate on what Therese and Peter shared? What might you add that's new, or what might you modify in what they shared?
For me, there's a massive trend that is true in the world, and for me, I'd like to expand and possibly reframe OD in it, and it has to do with technology, digital technology and information. And so this notion of being overwhelmed with information, I agree with that. There is a lot of it in terms of data that's out there, and what meaning and sense making can we do. And this is a shout out to the OD Journal, which is going to be doing something on digital OD. But for me, I think that we can look at things like Yammer, Facebook, Twitter, Maestro's a platform for it, you know, what we're doing here. That actually all, those are all levers for organization development. And I just put into the chat room, it's a very funny YouTube video about a conference call and how, you know, like people come late and they, you know, are doing their you know, email during it, and it's very funny, and I think it's telling. So for me, I'm looking at how to use these current technologies in ways, you know, IBM had jam sessions probably a decade ago, which were global experiences that they had where people had an opportunity for their voice to be heard. And I think if you go back to the roots of OD, it really is about people having their voices heard. And I talked about this divergence and convergence going on. There is so much good work being done out there, if you will, that we just don't know about. So the challenge for me is a combination of how do we take these platforms that give us so much opportunity of different time, different place communication, and start to curate it, start to gather it up in different ways that are useful to people. And so for me, this information age that we talk about, I mean, there are platforms out there, I think, that are just wonderful. And if we open our paradigm a little bit, I think that there's really good OD being done in organizations on Yammer, or you know, if you look at Twitter as an opportunity for people's voices to be heard, how big is the organization we're talking about? In LinkedIn, there are groups that are collaborating around learning and development. So for me, one of the more exciting things is looking at these new technologies as ways to more broadly define the field. It doesn't have to be people in a room anymore. It really can be the sharing of wisdom, knowledge, experience on the broadest scale possible, really on a global basis.
Thank you. Lena, what are your thoughts?
You know, I second that, Jake. I think technology certainly is giving us great possibilities for linkage. It also presents some major challenges as well. But I think the technology piece is really key. I also think that something that Therese had mentioned earlier, and that is if you want to call it, using Dale Connor, the whitewater of change is certainly here. And I think the whole need to better help organizations, people, organizations, groups, need I say countries, really cope with the change is something that still is very much, I believe, here today and is much a trend in the future. And that ties into the whole strategic aspects and global aspects. And question is, you know, how do we handle that? So those are some things that, you know, I'm thinking of. I see that Julie in the chat room asked a question. Isn't change management an oxymoron? Don't we need to ask our scholars to address this? It's an interesting thought. I guess in a way, managing change is certainly something that we want to try to do, but I understand that sometimes it's not always possible.
Well, I would offer that the way we think about management is really the key, because is management all about dictatorial control? Is it about guiding and facilitating? Is it about more organic leadership, servant leadership? What does the notion of management mean? And then we think of change management. Are we saying that we have more or less control? And when you look at stress research, the biggest thing for people is control. If the less control I feel I have, the more stress I experience. So I think the notion of change management is trying to say that we do have some control over what happens in our world around us. And if we can differentiate that control, what we can control versus what we can't, you know, that nice quote that talks about, you know, give me the wisdom to know the difference. I think that's what maybe change management's getting at. And someone wrote to me just the other day. I'm not sure who wants to take this as a question, but it's a reflection. I'm curious what the chat room thinks about this as well. And this came also, it has a direct relationship to ISOD and C, adding the C. The person wrote to me that they were at the change management conference, and there were 600 people there. And there was discussion of OD and its history and it being a foundation, and the foundation for change management. And she was shocked and surprised. I don't think shocked was the right word, but she was surprised to find that a significant number of people, more than 70%, did not know of OD. And we're very curious about it as a field, very curious about its history, very curious about its role in their notion of change management. So I'm curious as to what that means. I think that goes back to Jake, your point about this notion of divergence and convergence, and we're in the middle of something there. Does anybody want to take that and reflect on that? But what's happening? What does that mean as we think about the future?
One thing, Steve, I would just jump in with, because in the work I've done with Barry Johnson around polarities, one of the things that I think I've been learning is the concept of change as a pole. And people aren't familiar with Barry's work. You can go and do some reading on the web about it. But it's about looking at both and situations. So when we talk about continuity and transformation now, and you can talk about change and stability or whatever those two poles are, sustained success is something that we look at now and say, well, that's actually what an organization cares about. That's what people in an organization want. And so, change is part of the path to get there, and continuity is too. And I've said, if you want radical change, you better find ways to create radical stability. So even the whole notion of change, I think, is worth exploring and saying, what's at the core of that. And for me, at least these days, it really is about a both and around continuity and transformation.
Right. Right, thanks. And I put a little chart up there. Do you want to speak to that at all to give people a little primer on what is polarity management?
Yeah, just really quickly. What it says is there are interdependent opposites that need each other over time. So whether it's task and relationship, which you can go back to Blake and Mouton for, or continuity and transformation, inhale and exhale, these are interdependent opposites. So those two ovals will have those two dynamics in it. And an over-focus on one pole to the neglect of the other will get you some downside costs. So An overfocus on transformation, for example, will get you chaos, will actually create more resistance for yourself because it's in that bottom left quadrant. What you want to do is get the best of both contributions, best of both upsides. And so that's why, you know, you have a 9-9 manager. It's like, how do I do well on task and relationship? It's not a choice for one or the other. And you can put, you know, anything in there in terms of global and local, strategic and tactical. For leaders out of level 5 leadership, you can look at, you say, confidence and humility. But all of these are really interdependent dynamics. And so when you put them together, you get the best of both worlds rather than the least of either. Great.
And you could have the past and the future.
Past and future, right. There's one of the RTSC principles I use around preferred futuring that Ron spoke to is the best of the past and present and compelling visions of possibility for the future. And when you put those together, you get your best future. It's not just about looking ahead, but as you've done in terms of facilitating this conversation, what is the best of the past and present that we need to bring forward into the giants that we stand on to be creating what the future looks like in the field and for people and organizations.
Good, thank you. So it's time to wrap up, and this has been a really good conversation. And I'm going to check in with John, what's happening in the chat room, and I'll have a quick Gestalt checkout. So Lena and Therese and Peter and Jake, I'll ask you, what's kind of your takeaway from today, your Gestalt checkout? And in the chat room out there, if you all could put down kind of what's your bumper sticker Gestalt checkout, Gestalt meaning whole, and it's just a quick 1 to 3 or 4 words. What's your takeaway from today? What's your reflection or reaction to today? John, what are your what's your bumper sticker and what are you seeing out in Chatland?
Yeah, out in Chatland has been great. Everybody's been super active. There's a couple questions that are out that we haven't had a chance to answer. One is about the trends. They're asking for clarification. Are those trends that you see happening or wish they would happen? Then there's some other reflections about OD being not as well known, maybe not as well publicized, having more tangible outcomes. People are connecting, though, and they're interested in it. There is some appreciation for the presenters and the chatters. Brandon said he learned lots about OD as a whole. Sherry believes we need to build a better sense of community. Brian said it was a very interesting topic and learned a lot. Budimir said OD is always changing. It never truly stays the same. Learning from experienced leaders helps gain an understanding of everyone's future career. So that's kind of that's my very short recollection and summary of what's going on in the chat room. But this chat room will be recorded and available for everybody afterwards. And that's it.
Great, thank you, John. Lena, what's your bumper sticker as we say goodbye?
Well, there are a couple of things. One of which is it's interesting. Claire and Sherry were on the chat room. We're talking about needing a better sense of community. And, you know, I think that certainly opportunities such as this gives us a chance to get together, those of us who are in some way related to organization development and change, just as upcoming conferences are, such as the one that we'll be having beginning May 19 at George Williams Conference Center. These are opportunities for us to get together collegially because organization development and change is about change. We are changing, and being able to pick up ideas are really great. I want to also thank Therese and Jake for really kicking it off with the insights about the trends. So those are a couple of things that I'm thinking of.
Great, thank you, Lena. Therese and Peter, how about you as we wrap up?
Okay, I would just like to say that I'm really looking forward to continuing the discussion up at Lake Geneva at the ISOD and Change meeting.
Therese says people who aren't present usually get voted in to do something. So I vote that we get Diana Whitney back on when things are better with her mother, and Emily Axelrod. I'd love to hear 2 more women on this call next time in the near future, Steve.
Yeah, And we can do one on women in OD and all kinds of things like that if you'd like to do one in the future on that as well, which I think would be wonderful. We could set that up and do that.
Well, you know, and Steve, just as a reminder, we're going to have a panel that includes Therese and Emily and Chris Easley and Deb Pagel and Jenna Heinrichs on women in OD, and it'll be at our conference on May the 21st up at the Geneva.
Great, and there's the link there on the page. So that's great, thank you. And you all can also see for a community piece, we've got a discussion forum on LinkedIn, and we have those questions. So bring them there. We'll go visit there, and all of us will be there. We can chat and continue the conversation around this topic there on LinkedIn. So you can see the link there for that. And Jake, what are your closing thoughts?
You know, the polarity stuff, Steve, triggered for me individual and collective. And when we started this conversation around the Addison Wesley books, there really were individuals early in the field who were making contributions. And as I look to the future, and I mentioned all of the social media type things, everybody is really creating the future of OD. And through these different platforms, I see that there's sort of this oscillation toward the collective. And you can learn so much from going out and looking that some of it's published, some of it's published on the web in different ways, some of it's just in private conversations. I think that really is what stands out for me is sort of this whole proliferation notion and find something that's useful and the connection between the different approaches and integration. I mean, I know I've done some of this with Barry's work, and you have a blended approach to a lot of different things. I think that's the other thing that stands out.
Thank you, Jake. And then in wrapping up, there's a couple of things I want to call your attention to out there before you all leave. One is I would like to go back and give a little shout out to the OD Journal special issue that I'm doing. In addition, we are wrapping up. We've got many of our articles are in. We might have room for someone if they have a great article that relates to digital OD. If you want to find out more, just go to tinyurl.com/digitalOD and or send an email to us and just say, hey, I've got something I'd like to write about, or I have something that I'm currently working on, because this is a special issue focusing on the role of the digital world in organization development, and lots of good articles are coming in. And last but not least, we also will have a survey coming up. Please fill the survey out at the end. Just click it. It takes about 3 minutes just to let us know what you're thinking, your views on this, how we can do better, as well as future topics, because we move quickly. Some of you may have a great topic you want to share, and you have something really cool and some great evidence and other kinds of things and stories to share that can help others. Send your idea to us. We're always open to sharing the great work that you all are doing out in the world, and all of you are doing something really special. So if you've got something you want to share in that gift that we talked about, please let us know. We'd welcome having an opportunity to share the good work you're doing and connect you with others. And last but not least, we've got 2 webinars coming up, and the 2 webinars, we've got one that's Mindful OD, Enabling Challenging Conversations, and then the other one is the Change Formula, DVFS. There's an there's a group authoring an article on this. It's the mythology around this cool change formula. It's been around for about 40 years. Not a lot has been formally written, lots of sporadic stuff in chapters and places. The authors will be talking about their experience in writing and crafting that article, and you're invited to sit in as a part of the fishbowl with the authors. So with that, you can go to Nexus for Change to find out these webinars and register for them. And if you need anything else, just send us an email. And with that, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon or see you soon, and bye for now.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.